Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this four-part series, which is brought to you with support from APA Style, publisher of the publication manual of the American Psychological Association, my guests and I will be demystifying APA Style. Joining me are Chelsea Lee and Timothy McAdoo. Chelsea is instructional lead at APA Style and Timothy is manager. Chelsea and Timothy are on hand to address some of the most frequently asked questions about the formats and guidelines of APA Style, including everyone's favorite, references. They'll also debunk myths, address some of the more unique reference sources, generative AI, anyone? And since APA Style isn't just about references, we'll also learn about their bias-free language guidelines, communicating with visuals, and accessibility. In this second episode of our four-part series, we explore the principles, methodology, and unique forms of reference formatting. So APA Style isn't just about references, and we'll get to some of the other important guidelines, but as Chelsea was describing in the last episode, references are nevertheless a major style element. Let's continue that. Can you talk broadly about the principle of references?
Absolutely. So APA style references, broadly speaking, have four parts: author, date, title, source. And the parts almost always go in that order.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have in-text citations that correspond to the reference entries. And the in-text citation is composed of the first two components of the reference, which is going to be the author and the year. And so you have sort of this like a pair where the in-text citation goes with the reference list entry. And then the goal or a goal of references is that you're briefly showing in the text what work you cited. And then in the reference, the readers can identify the work and then go locate it themselves.
Mm.
And so the point of the reference is for you to put information in it that's actually on the work. So we just say like, cite what's there. It's not about including every detail that exists about the reference. You want the person who's reading your reference to look at the source itself and be like, yeah, that's the thing they use. That's the same thing. And so for that, it's important that like when you're writing references, you're not supposed to be going on like a scavenger hunt trying to figure out what is the author, date, title, and source, because your readers aren't going to be doing that. So like, don't be digging through HTML source code, trying to figure out don't just more what's there and how can they say, okay, I'm looking at the same thing as that person.
Okay. So then I guess as being such a major component of APA Style, references have developed their own mythology, I suppose. Can you talk about and maybe dispel some of the more popular myths about references?
Sure. One myth is that there's a requirement for sources to have for your sources to be no more than, say, 5 years old or 10 years old. And we hear that a lot, and we've covered this on the blog. And I think it comes from instructors. We think it comes from instructors giving that kind of requirement to students for specific assignments, which of course makes sense. But then it may be misremembered or misunderstood as an APA style rule or guideline. And so of course, we recommend follow your instructor's guidelines. If you're writing a class paper, do that first and then follow APA style second. But if your instructor hasn't asked for a limit, the importance of citing only recently published sources really depends on what you're writing about. So some topics, the important early works that you want to cite may be old and you still want to cite them, or maybe it's a topic where there isn't really any good recent research, and that's why you're interested. So you're going to cite something older. So it really just depends on the context. And there's not an APA style rule, quote unquote, that limits what you can cite or how old it can be.
Yes. And a related one is the myth that there's sources that can and can't be cited. When we made an example for citing Wikipedia, there was a big fuss. People were aghast at the idea of citing Wikipedia. And of course, this is because, like in a classroom context, the teacher doesn't want the students citing Wikipedia because it's an encyclopedia and they're just like copying an encyclopedia entry for their paper. And that's not the point going on there. But like Tim was saying, it all depends on context. Like, why are you wanting to cite Wikipedia? Maybe you're writing a paper about like online crowdsourced information. Then you should absolutely cite Wikipedia. Maybe you have a paper that is about something else and you do need to cite an encyclopedia entry about something. Like, you could cite it in that context. So the point is, like, APA style is used in lots of different settings. It's not only students in classrooms, it's also the researchers publishing the research, like we mentioned. It's also just everyday people who want to follow a writing style, writing guide. And so we're not having these barriers to like what can and can't be cited. Instead, it's like, here are the guidelines for how to create the references in a consistent way when they're needed and when it's appropriate.
Okay. So can we talk about that word guidelines? I mean, I think sometimes, these aren't uh, hard and fast rules. They tend to be sort of, here's what we're suggesting you do, basically, right?
Absolutely. We
Yeah.
really tried to make use of the word guidelines and not rules.
Yeah.
Conscious effort for that, because the guidelines is supposed to be useful and we're trying to show like, okay, here's the best case scenario. But if
Mm.
the scenario you have doesn't fit, like, we're flexible. The goal is clarity and communication. And that's true across APA style for sure.
Mhm. Right. So speaking of using Wikipedia as a source, I mean, what are some of the more unique sources for referencing? Can you describe those and generally how they're cited? I mean, we could start with one that's probably on top of everyone's mind now, and that's AI tools like ChatGPT, for example.
Sure. I mean, so that's really interesting, right? It is similar to the Wikipedia example where some people want us to say you cannot do this, and we started to get questions pretty early, and it turned into daily questions about how do I cite this, right? And we were like, what is this? So we were learning about it in real time with everyone else and reading about it, and so we started by just asking for feedback from people, and if people being students and instructors and researchers and experts in the field of AI. So we got lots of feedback and we considered that, and we also wanted to be sure that what we any recommendations we came up with would be consistent with the templates and the author, date, title, source format that we've discussed. So usually our process, if someone says, how do I cite this special thing, like Chelsea said, we look at what kind of document is it, and that tells us which template is the best fit. It's a periodical, so we look at the periodicals template, and then within that template you got the 4 elements, and we can go dig in from there to the little pieces in those elements and put the reference together. So for ChatGPT, the closest sort of analogy was the software template, which is interestingly has been in the publication manual since about the 3rd edition. And software wasn't the perfect term for ChatGPT, but it was the closest template. And also some of the existing guidelines about if you use computer software, explaining how you used it and were applicable. So that was our starting point. And then for citing software, the author is generally the organization that published the software, and the date is the date, and the title is the name of the software. And then there's a few other elements in the reference that are a little bit of additional detail than usual. One is to include the version number, and the second is to include a description in square brackets about what is this thing I'm citing. So
Yeah.
that's actually something that you can do across any reference in APA style. It gives the reader additional information about something if it's not clearly a journal article or a book or a traditional source. You can explain in square brackets what you've got. So that's how we sort of came to the template that you can see in the blog post about ChatGPT.
Yep.
And in addition to all of that, like here's how to cite it if you cite it. We also recommended that you explain in your method section how you used it, and then put the full text of your prompt and the chat that was the text that was generated in an appendix or in supplemental materials if you've got that option. And so we know that this is definitely going to change, so we're going to be keeping an eye on it. But that's how we came to the recommendations we have right now.
Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned including the version number in the citation. Wondering if why is that an important element in the reference? Like, is that because these tools change and grow and evolve and
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
For ChatGPT, but even for software, yeah. What it sort of it just tells the reader what it was like at the time that you used it, right? And it may be
Right.
different now.
Right, exactly. Like I know with ChatGPT, there's a corpus of data that it was trained on that ends at a certain point in time. And
Mhm.
I imagine in the future they will add more data,
More.
and so it's relevant to know like when in time did you use this tool. And so the version number is helping supply information about that.
Right. Excellent. So I'm curious. You mentioned you kind of reached out to experts in the field to sort of advise on how to handle this. I mean, do you typically have like an external advisory committee or sort of editors at large that kind of help with these types of questions?
We have outside task forces that we work with when the big, like related to project milestones. So a
Okay.
big one was when we were developing the 7th edition publication manual. The process took years, and we worked with a task force during that. So it's like the APA style team, like me and Tim, who and our like the director who work there all the time. And then the task force has people who are journal editors, they're professors at colleges, they're academic librarians, graduate students. And so all of those people have their perspective about using APA style, what needs to be part of APA style, what it should say, how it should say it.
Hmm.
And then there's additional committees of people who do their work and then sort of send us their draft of what they want to say. For example, for the bias-free language information, there's committees about each of the different topics. So like there's a committee about disability issues in psychology, and that group of people got together and said, here's our best recommendations for like an introduction to this topic of what you should say. And so there's lots of people who are involved. And then sort of as the cycle of the edition goes on, it's more people in the APA style team holding down the fort and then like consulting with the stakeholders sort of as needed.
Yeah, just kind of refining things. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Tim, do you think that's accurate?
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
even with the ChatGPT, of course, we consulted with APA journals as well.
You just heard from Chelsea Lee and Timothy McAdoo. Chelsea is instructional lead at APA Style, and Timothy is manager. This series is brought to you with support from APA Style. Join us next week when we venture beyond reference formatting to discuss bias-free language guidelines, data visualization, and accessible design. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.